Imagine, just for a moment, a world that is slowly, methodically tightening around you like a fist.
It's a terrifying image to start with, but
Yeah,
yeah, it's accurate.
it's really the only way to describe it. And in that grip, the first thing to go is sound. Laughter has to be swallowed, footsteps have to be lighter than air, even, the walls of your own home. They turn into potential informants.
Right.
But here's the paradox that always gets me. In the middle of that suffocating heavy silence, a voice emerges.
And not just any voice.
No, a teenage girl's voice. And because she was forced into this absolute silence, she ended up becoming one of the loudest, most enduring voices in all of human history.
It is arguably the most profound irony of the 20th century. You try to erase a person, and in that act, you make them immortal.
Today, we are doing a deep dive into the whispering voice of the secret annex. And look, I know everyone listening right now is nodding their heads. You know the name Anne Frank, you know the tragic ending. We all read the basics in middle school.
Right. But that's the trap. We think we know the story because we know the ending. But the mission of this deep dive is to move past those, general historical bullet points. We aren't here to summarize the plot of a book everyone's already read.
Exactly. We want to get into the texture of the experience. We're looking at this specific internal world Anne constructed, how she used words not just to record history, but to essentially breathe when the air in the room was just too thick with fear.
But we're treating this source material as a guide to her craftsmanship, not just her suffering.
Which is a crucial distinction. We often treat the diary as this accidental artifact.
Yeah, like something that just happened to be found. But as we'll see, it was a very intentional act of defiance.
So let's rewind. Let's set the scene properly before the annex, because the tragedy doesn't hit as hard if you don't understand what was lost. The text describes her being born into a world that was already tilting toward disaster.
I love that phrasing, tilting toward disaster. It captures that sense of vertigo, like the ground is shifting, but you're still trying to walk in a straight line.
But before that tilt became a landslide, her life was aggressively normal. And I think we skip this part too often. She grew up in a loving Jewish family, yes, but it was full of ordinary dreams, small arguments, and shared jokes.
She wasn't some saint in waiting.
No. She was a kid who probably didn't want to eat her vegetables and talk too much in class.
She was known as a chatterbox. That's the part that just kills me. She was vibrant, loud, social, and if you don't understand the normalcy of the before, you can't really grasp the violence of the after.
And then the erosion begins. The source material highlights this specific creeping disappearance of freedom. It wasn't an explosion. It disappeared in pieces so small that no one noticed at first.
That's the boiling frog effect of tyranny, isn't it? It doesn't usually start with the camps. It starts with the bureaucracy.
Right. The text mentions hatred beginning to wear uniforms and march openly. But for Anne, it was way more practical and, well, annoying than that. It was the anti-Jewish measures.
Yeah, what?
You can't ride the tram.
You can't ride your bike.
You can't sit on a bench in the park.
And you have to think about the psychological impact of that on a 12-year-old. The world is telling you that you don't take up space in the same way other people do. You are being narrowed.
Names turning into labels. That's the concept the text really drills down on. You stop being Anne and you start being a category to be managed.
Dehumanization isn't just an event. It's a process. It prepares the world to look away when the really bad things start to happen.
So we get to the pivotal moment. July 1942. Anne is 13. 13. I mean, I remember being 13. My biggest worry was whether my crush liked me back. And suddenly, her sister Margot gets a call at US for a labor camp.
Which everyone knew was a euphemism. They knew it meant deportation.
Exactly. So the family vanishes, but they don't flee the country. They didn't have the connections or the money to get to Switzerland or the US. They did something arguably more terrifying.
They didn't leave the city.
They just stepped behind a bookcase.
Right in the middle of Amsterdam. Prinsengracht 263. Above her father's business.
And this is where we need to stop and really visualize the secret annex. Because I think people imagine, I don't know, a dusty attic. But it was a 2-story space hidden behind a movable bookcase. And it wasn't just the Franks.
No, and this is where so much of the tension comes from. It was the 4 Franks, then the 3 members of the Van Pels family, who she calls the Van Danes in the diary, and eventually Fritz Pfeffer, a dentist.
8 people living in whispers. just try to conceptualize the logistics of that. We aren't just talking about being quiet. We're talking about a totally regimented schedule of silence.
From 8:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m., while the warehouse workers were downstairs, they couldn't run water, they couldn't flush the toilet, they couldn't walk in shoes.
Can you imagine? You have to cough, you have to smother it in a pillow, you drop a fork. That little clatter could literally be a death sentence.
The source says that time slowed down, days just blurred together, and fear became a routine.
That phrase, routine fear, that's what sticks with me. Humans aren't built for that. Fear is supposed to be a spike adrenaline reaction, safety. But when fear is the baseline for 2 years, that is just chronic trauma.
And the friction. You've got 8 people trapped in a pressure cooker, the adults arguing in these hushed voices about food, about politics, about how to parent. And Anne is stuck in the middle of this, an adolescent who naturally wants to rebel, but she has literally nowhere to go.
Which is why the diary isn't just a hobby. In this context, it's a survival mechanism.
It's essential.
So let's unpack the diary itself. Because she didn't just write in a diary. She created a persona. She named it Kitty.
Which is, honestly, a brilliant literary device.
It is. The source argues that this tells you everything you need to know. Kitty wasn't just paper. In Anne's mind, Kitty was the ideal listener. The text says Kitty listened and understood, and most importantly, could not betray her.
Think about that. In an environment where every external interaction is dangerous, where the adults are stressed and snapping at you, where you have zero privacy, having a friend who literally cannot snitch, who cannot judge you, is a psychological necessity.
And she did not hold back. I think that's why we still read it today. It wasn't some holy book of profound thoughts. It held her anger at her mother.
Oh, the friction with her mother was intense, really intense.
It held her jealousy, her petty grievances, and her crushes, the romance with Peter Van Pels, that whole arc of them bonding in the attic because they were the only 2 young people there.
It's the full range of human emotion. The source puts it perfectly. In a place where she could not be fully herself out loud, she became fully herself on the page.
That's the key. The diary was the only room in the annex where she could actually stretch her legs. Now here's where we get to the part of this deep dive that really blew my mind, the writer's ambition. Because I think the popular narrative is that she was just a girl scribbling her thoughts and we just happened to find them.
That is probably the biggest misconception about Anne Frank.
The source points out that she wasn't just writing, she was revising. She was editing her own work.
Yes, this is so crucial. In March 1944, she heard a radio broadcast from London. It was Gerrit Bolkestein, the Dutch Minister of Education in exile, and he said that after the war, they would collect diaries and letters to document the suffering of the Dutch people.
And Anne hears this, and a light bulb just goes off.
Completely. She decides right then and there, I am going to publish a book based on my diary. And she starts rewriting. We actually have 2 versions of the diary. Version A is the original spontaneous one. Version B is the one she rewrote on loose sheets of paper, polishing descriptions, cutting parts she thought were too boring or too mean, creating pseudonyms for everyone.
That is just fascinating. She was effectively editing her own life in real time. She was crafting a narrative.
She was a writer, honing her craft. She had, as the text says, wild dreams of becoming a journalist or famous writer. She wasn't just passively waiting to be saved, she was working.
It totally dispels that myth of accidental fame. The circumstances were accidental, but the quality of the prose, that was intentional labor.
Which makes the tragedy even sharper, doesn't it? She was just getting started.
And despite the work and the fear, we have to talk about her internal world, the view from the attic. The source mentions the unbearable boredom of hiding. I think we forget how mind-numbingly boring it must have been to stare at the same wall for 700 days.
Boredom combined with terror is a very unique kind of torture.
But amidst that, she was documenting beauty. The text highlights these specific tiny images she captured. Sunlight catching dust in the air.
That's a detail you only notice when you are sitting very, very still for a very long time.
And the chestnut tree, that famous chestnut tree that was visible through the attic window.
That tree became her anchor. It was the only piece of the living, changing, biological world she could see. Seasons changed on that tree, even if time had basically stopped inside the annex.
The source has this powerful line, even in fear, life insisted on being felt. She was practically forcing herself to see the good, just to keep from drowning in the bad.
And that's where her maturity really shows.
Yeah.
The source notes that she understood the world clearly while still being young enough to feel it deeply. She wasn't naive. She questioned authority. She asked why people chose hate when kindness was so much easier.
She asked the big questions that the adults were too busy fighting a war to even ask. And then there's the core belief, the one everyone quotes, that she believed humans were good at heart.
But we have to be really careful with that quote.
Why is that?
Because it gets misused as this, like, fluffy, everything is nice sentiment. The source frames it very differently. It says she believed it stubbornly.
Stubbornly. I like that.
It wasn't an observation based on evidence, because all the evidence around her was just terrible. It was a refusal to give in to cynicism. It was a moral choice. She chose to believe in humanity, even as humanity was failing her every single day.
That reframing changes everything. It makes her optimism feel like a muscle she was exercising, an act of defiance rather than just a sweet personality quirk.
Absolutely, it was work.
But then the work stops. The source describes the end so abruptly, August 4th, 1944.
A date that just splits the story in two.
Boots on stairs, doors forced open.
It was the SD German security service and Dutch police. Someone had betrayed them. To this day, we still don't know for sure who it was.
And the silence that had been their protection suddenly becomes their tomb. The silence falls over the annex forever.
It's such a brutal transition. We go from this rich, loud, internal world, the romance with Peter, the editing of the manuscript, the dreams of Paris, to an empty room.
And we have to address the reality. We can't shy away from it. The source states it plainly and did not survive. She died in Bergen-Belsen in early 1945, likely of typhus. She was 15 years old.
She died just weeks before the camp was liberated by the British. She was alone, thinking her father was dead. She was far from the diary, far from the truth.
And far from the girl she was becoming. That phrase from the text it really got me. We mourn the girl who was, but we also mourn the woman she never got to be. The books she never wrote.
And this is the pivot point of the whole story, the reason we are even talking today. Her voice escaped.
This is where Miep Gies comes in. We have to give a shout out to Miep Gies.
One of the helpers who kept them alive for 2 years. An absolute hero.
After the arrest, Miep went back into the annex. She found the papers scattered on the floor, the notebooks, the loose sheets of version B, and she just scooped them all up.
She didn't read them. She put them in a drawer and said, "I'll keep these for Anne when she comes back." She said later if she had read them, she might have destroyed them because they incriminated all the helpers. But she didn't. She just kept them safe.
And when Otto Frank, the father, was the only one of the 8 to return from the camps, Miep gave him the papers. She said, "Here is your daughter's legacy."
Can you imagine that moment, returning to that silence, having lost everything, and then being handed this stack of paper where your daughter is still alive?
And he made the choice to share it. He fulfilled her wish. He got it published in 1947. And the diary went from the private thoughts of a girl who thought no one would ever listen
to being read by millions and millions of people. It is the ultimate victory over that tightening fist we talked about at the beginning. The Nazi regime wanted to erase her. They wanted to turn her name into a number, process her, and delete her. Instead, she became one of the most read authors in human history.
So let's talk about what she's become. The source says she became a symbol, but it clarifies not a symbol of perfect bravery.
No, and that's so important. We tend to turn historical figures into statues, perfect, unshakable marble. But the source says she's a symbol of human honesty, of courage that exists alongside fear, not in the absence of it.
That makes her so much more accessible. You don't have to be fearless to be brave. You just have to be honest about your fear.
Exactly. And because of that honesty, the text says her words allow history to breathe and to feel.
History is not distant. That's the quote. It breathes. It sounds like a young girl asking the world to just do better.
It prevents us from looking at World War II as just, black and white reels of armies marching on a map. It brings it down to the level of a heartbeat, a specific person who hated math and loved movies, who was lost.
It reminds us, as the source says, what is lost when hatred wins.
And conversely, what survives when truth is written down.
It's just this powerful testament to the act of writing itself, writing as an act of survival. Even if the body doesn't survive, the truth can.
And that truth is uncomfortable.
I'm glad you brought that up because I want to circle back to the very end of the source material. It leaves us with something unsettling.
The unsettling thought, yeah.
We all love the quote about people being good at heart. It makes us feel good. It makes us feel like, oh, look how sweet she was. It kind of absolves us in a way.
But the source just flips the mirror right back on us.
It says Anne believed in humanity until the end.
Right.
But the question isn't whether she was right to believe that.
No. The question is whether we are worthy of that belief.
Oof. That hits hard. Are we today, right now, living in a way that justifies the face of a 15-year-old girl who died in a concentration camp.
It transforms her belief from a comforting quote on a poster into a challenge, a moral challenge for every single generation that picks up that book. She did her part. She held on to her humanity in the face of absolute inhumanity. The burden is now on us to live up to it.
And that is a heavy but necessary thing to carry with you. It stops being a history lesson and it starts being a mirror.
It really is.
We started with the image of a world tightening like a fist, and we ended with the expansive freedom of a girl's mind. It's been quite a journey through this text.
It's a reminder that while walls can confine a body, they cannot confine a voice, provided someone is brave enough to write it down.
And brave enough to keep it safe.
Precisely.
Thank you for listening to this deep dive into the whispering voice of the secret annex. It's a story we think we know, but every time you really look, there's something new to find in the shadows.
Keep listening, keep reading,
Yeah.
and keep asking if we're worthy of that belief.
We'll see you next time.